Some doors stay closed because of grief. Others stay closed because someone is still waiting. 11 months after his daughter died, Daniel Brooks still could not bring himself to open the bedroom door at the end of the hallway. The white paint remained untouched. The brass handle still carried faint fingerprints from years of ordinary mornings and bedtime routines. Everything beyond that door belonged to another life. A better life. A life before hospitals, whispered prayers, and empty chairs at the dinner table. The old farmhouse sat alone on 20 acres outside Bozeman, Montana. Pine trees surrounded the property like silent guardians, and every evening the wind carried the scent of earth and wood smoke across the valley. Daniel used to love the quiet. Now the quiet felt heavier than any sound. At 44 years old, the former Marine had survived deployments, storms, and losses he rarely discussed. None of them prepared him for losing Emily. She had been 11 years old. Bright. Curious. Always asking questions nobody else thought to ask. The kind of child who left warmth behind even after she walked out of a room. Since her passing, Daniel had learned how to move through each day without truly living it. He woke up. Drank coffee. Worked around the property. Ate when he remembered. Slept when exhaustion finally won. The bedroom at the end of the hallway remained closed through all of it. Until Rex made it impossible to ignore. The German Shepherd had arrived at the shelter nearly 2 years earlier. Nobody knew much about his history. He had been quiet from the beginning. Smart. Gentle. The kind of dog who seemed to understand emotions without needing commands. Emily had fallen in love with him immediately. Daniel still remembered her laughter the first day Rex came home. Somehow the dog had become her shadow. Then, after Emily was gone, something changed. Every night, without fail, Rex walked down the hallway shortly before 10 o'clock. He stopped in front of Emily's bedroom door and settled onto the floorboards. He never scratched. Never barked. Never whined. He simply stayed there. Watching. Waiting. Daniel noticed it during the first weeks but assumed the habit would fade. It never did. Night after night. Month after month. The same routine continued. Tonight was no different. Rain tapped softly against the windows while a cold autumn wind rattled the branches outside. Daniel sat alone in the living room, staring at a television he was not actually watching. The glow flickered across the walls. The clock above the fireplace read 9:57 p.m. Without thinking, Daniel glanced toward the hallway. Rex was already gone. A familiar knot tightened in his chest. He stood and walked slowly through the dim house. The hallway felt longer than usual. Shadows stretched across the floor. When he reached the end, he found Rex exactly where he expected. The German Shepherd lay directly in front of the bedroom door. His ears were raised. His eyes remained fixed on the handle. Daniel sighed softly. "Come on, buddy." Rex did not move. Daniel crouched beside him and gently touched his shoulder. Normally that was enough. Tonight it was not. The dog remained perfectly still. Then something unusual happened. Rex slowly turned his head and looked at Daniel. Not toward the kitchen. Not toward the living room. Toward the door. Then back at Daniel again. As if asking him to notice something he had missed. For the first time in 11 months, Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. And for the first time in 11 months, he found himself staring directly at the bedroom door. Daniel did not open the door that night. He stood there for nearly a minute with his hand hovering inches from the brass handle, but the weight in his chest became too much. Finally, he stepped back. Rex remained where he was, watching quietly. The former Marine shook his head and forced a tired smile. Not tonight. The dog lowered his head onto his paws, but something about his expression made Daniel feel as though he had disappointed someone. Sleep came slowly. Rain continued tapping against the farmhouse roof long after midnight. Several times Daniel woke and stared into the darkness, thinking about the look Rex had given him. By morning, the uneasy feeling had not disappeared. Thin sunlight filtered through the kitchen window while coffee brewed on the counter. The scent filled the room, but even that familiar comfort failed to settle his thoughts. Outside, a layer of fog drifted across the fields. The maple trees near the barn appeared and disappeared behind the gray mist. Daniel carried his mug to the front porch and watched the morning unfold. Normally Rex would be beside him. Today the dog was missing. Daniel found him 10 minutes later. The German Shepherd sat at the end of the hallway facing the closed bedroom door. It was not yet 8 o'clock. The routine usually began at night. Seeing him there in daylight felt different. Stranger. Daniel leaned against the wall and studied the dog. Rex did not react. His eyes remained fixed on the door. The silence stretched. Eventually Daniel walked away, but the image followed him throughout the day. He repaired a fence near the north pasture. Rex stayed close as always. Yet every so often the dog would stop and glance toward the house. Around lunchtime Daniel noticed it again. Around mid-afternoon he noticed it twice more. Each time, Rex seemed distracted by something only he understood. Memories began surfacing whether Daniel wanted them or not. Emily used to spend hours inside that bedroom. Drawing pictures. Reading books. Building imaginary worlds from blankets and cardboard boxes. Sometimes she would sit cross-legged on the floor with Rex stretched beside her, reading stories aloud as though the dog were another student in the room. Daniel remembered laughing the first time he saw it. Emily had looked up and whispered, "He likes hearing them." Rex had wagged his tail on cue. The memory arrived so clearly that Daniel had to stop working for a moment. Grief moved like weather. Some days it stayed beyond the horizon. Other days it appeared without warning and swallowed everything. By evening the sky had cleared completely. Stars emerged above the valley one by one. After dinner Daniel found himself standing in the hallway again. He checked the clock. 9:48 p.m. Right on schedule, Rex walked toward the bedroom door and settled into his usual position. Daniel crouched beside him. This time he paid closer attention. The dog was not staring at the center of the door. His gaze seemed slightly lower. Slightly to the left. Toward the area inside where an old bookshelf stood against the wall. Daniel frowned. The detail tugged at something in the back of his mind. Before he could place it, Rex slowly rose to his feet. The German Shepherd stepped closer to the door and lowered his nose toward the narrow gap beneath it. Then he paused. Completely still. A second later, he looked back at Daniel. And for the first time since Emily's passing, Daniel felt something stronger than grief. He felt curiosity. Because suddenly he could not shake the feeling that Rex was not guarding the room at all. He was trying to show him something inside it. The next evening arrives colder than the last. A sharp wind sweeps across the Montana fields, bending the tall grass and carrying the scent of pine through the darkness. Daniel spends the entire day trying to ignore the question that has settled inside his mind. By sunset, he finally admits defeat. He cannot stop thinking about the room. He cannot stop thinking about the place where Rex keeps looking. The farmhouse feels unusually quiet after dinner. The ticking clock above the fireplace seems louder than normal. Every sound echoes through the empty halls. At 9:35 p.m., Daniel finds himself standing near the hallway long before Rex begins his nightly ritual. The German Shepherd lies beside the couch, watching him with calm eyes. "You win," Daniel says softly. "I am thinking about it." One ear twitches. That is all. Yet somehow it feels like an answer. 15 minutes later, Rex rises and walks toward the bedroom. Daniel follows immediately. The dog settles in front of the door as always. This time Daniel does not hesitate. His hand closes around the brass handle. For a brief moment, grief rushes through him like icy water. Images flash across his memory. Emily laughing while decorating the room for Christmas. Emily reading books on rainy afternoons. Emily falling asleep beneath a mountain of blankets while Rex guarded the floor beside her bed. Daniel closes his eyes. Then he opens the door. The scent inside stops him instantly. Not because it is strong. Because it is familiar. Dust, old paper, lavender, and something else he cannot name. 11 months have passed, yet the room still feels like Emily. Moonlight spills through the curtains and paints silver patterns across the floor. Nothing appears disturbed. Her books remain neatly arranged. Her drawings still hang on the wall. A stuffed bear sits exactly where she left it. Daniel steps inside slowly. Behind him, Rex enters without hesitation. The dog moves through the room with quiet confidence. Not like a visitor. Like someone returning to a place he knows well. Daniel's chest tightens as memories rise from every corner. He almost turns around. Then he notices Rex. The German Shepherd is no longer looking around the room. His attention is fixed on a bookshelf near the far wall. The same place Daniel noticed through the closed door. Rex walks directly toward it. He stops and sits. Waiting. Daniel approaches. The bookshelf is filled with children's novels, sketchbooks, family photographs, and small keepsakes collected over the years. Everything appears normal at first glance. Yet something feels slightly off. He studies the shelves carefully. Dust covers most surfaces. Except for one narrow section near the bottom. Daniel kneels. His fingers brush against the wood. The dust pattern is uneven. As though something had been moved long ago. Or perhaps hidden. He leans closer. The back edge of the bookshelf seems separated from the wall by a fraction of an inch. Not enough to notice casually. Enough to notice now. His pulse quickens. Rex remains perfectly still. Watching. Daniel carefully grips the side of the bookshelf and applies gentle pressure. For several seconds nothing happens. Then a faint scraping sound breaks the silence. One of the lower corners shifts slightly. Daniel freezes. His heart pounds against his ribs. Behind years of dust and forgotten memories, a narrow gap has appeared. And inside that gap, barely visible beneath the moonlight, he catches sight of something small and wooden hidden behind the shelf. For several seconds, Daniel simply stared at the narrow opening behind the bookshelf. The room felt impossibly still. Even the wind outside seemed to have paused. Moonlight stretched across the floorboards while dust floated through the air like tiny silver stars. Behind him, Rex remained seated exactly where he had stopped. Calm. Patient. Waiting. Daniel slowly shifted the bookshelf farther from the wall. The scraping sound echoed softly through the room. The hidden space became visible at last. Tucked inside was a small wooden box no larger than a shoebox. Its surface was worn with age, and a thin layer of dust suggested it had not been touched in a very long time. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He reached inside the gap and carefully lifted the box free. The wood felt surprisingly light in his hands. For a moment he simply held it, unsure whether he was ready to discover what waited inside. The bedroom suddenly seemed filled with memories. Every object around him carried a piece of Emily's life. The colorful drawings on the wall. The books she loved. The blanket folded neatly at the end of the bed. It felt as though the room had been holding its breath for 11 months, waiting for this exact moment. Daniel carried the box to the center of the room and sat on the floor. Rex quietly moved closer and settled beside him. The familiar warmth of the German Shepherd against his shoulder offered comfort Daniel had not realized he needed. He brushed away the dust and examined the lid. There was no lock. No label. Nothing except a small carved heart in one corner. His throat tightened immediately. He recognized it. Emily had drawn hearts exactly like that in nearly every notebook she owned. With trembling fingers, Daniel opened the box. The scent of old paper drifted upward. Inside were dozens of carefully preserved memories. Crayon drawings folded neatly into stacks. Photographs from family vacations. Ticket stubs from baseball games. Birthday cards. Small treasures that would have looked meaningless to anyone else. To Daniel, they felt priceless. He picked up one photograph. Emily stood beside Rex in the backyard beneath the maple tree. Both were covered in mud. Both looked equally proud of themselves. Daniel laughed unexpectedly. The sound startled him. It had been a long time since laughter entered this room. More photographs followed. Emily teaching Rex to shake paws. Emily reading beside him on the porch swing. Emily asleep on the couch while the dog rested nearby like a silent guardian. Each image felt like opening a forgotten window. Grief remained present, but something else appeared beside it. Gratitude. Then Daniel noticed an envelope resting beneath the photographs. Unlike everything else in the box, it looked untouched. Clean. Carefully sealed. His breath caught. Slowly, he lifted it free. The paper felt heavier than it should have. On the front, written in familiar handwriting, were two simple words. For Dad. The room seemed to shrink around him. Every sound disappeared. Daniel stared at the envelope while emotions collided inside his chest. 11 months of silence suddenly felt very fragile. Beside him, Rex raised his head and watched quietly. Daniel looked from the envelope to the dog. An impossible thought crossed his mind. What if this was why Rex had never left? What if the dog had been waiting all this time for him to find this? Daniel carefully traced the handwriting with his thumb. Then, with his heart pounding harder than it had in years, he slipped one finger beneath the sealed edge and prepared to finally read the words his daughter had left behind. Daniel opened the envelope with the same care he might have used to handle something fragile and irreplaceable. The paper crackled softly in the silence. For a moment he simply stared at the folded letter resting inside. His hands trembled. Across the room, moonlight continued spilling through the curtains, illuminating the familiar shapes of Emily's bedroom. Nothing had changed. Yet everything suddenly felt different. Beside him, Rex rested quietly on the floor, his eyes never leaving Daniel. Slowly, Daniel unfolded the letter. The handwriting immediately brought a sharp ache to his chest. It was unmistakably hers. Neat in some places. Uneven in others. Written by a young girl who had never worried about perfection. The first line nearly stole the breath from his lungs. Hi Dad. If you are reading this, then Rex finally did his job. Daniel blinked several times. A faint smile appeared despite the tears gathering in his eyes. It sounded exactly like Emily. Direct. Honest. A little playful. He continued reading. I know you probably found this much later than I wanted. That is okay. Sometimes hearts need more time than clocks do. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment. The words felt strangely mature coming from an 11-year-old girl. Yet Emily had always possessed a way of seeing things that surprised people. She noticed loneliness in strangers. She remembered details others forgot. She often spoke as though she understood emotions long before she should have. The letter continued. I do not want this to be a goodbye letter because goodbyes are sad. I want it to be a tomorrow letter. Tomorrow means something is still coming. Something good. Daniel swallowed hard. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the farmhouse. The sound felt distant now. The room had become the entire world. Emily wrote about ordinary memories. Ice cream after Little League games. Camping trips beside mountain lakes. Snow days spent building forts in the yard. Each memory carried warmth rather than sadness. Daniel found himself smiling through tears as forgotten moments returned one by one. Then the letter changed. The sentences became more personal. Dad, I know you get quiet when you are hurting. You think nobody notices, but I always notice. Rex notices too. Daniel's grip tightened slightly on the paper. His eyes moved to the next lines. If there comes a day when I am not here and you feel lonely, please do not stay lonely forever. That is not what love is supposed to do. Love is supposed to stay open. Daniel closed his eyes. The word struck deeper than he expected. For months he had convinced himself that holding on to grief was a way of holding on to Emily. The letter seemed to gently challenge that belief. When he opened his eyes again, he continued reading. There was one final section written near the bottom of the page. The handwriting appeared slightly smaller, as though Emily had wanted to make sure it fit. I asked Rex to help me with something important. I think he understands more than people realize. I told him there might be a day when you need help finding this letter. I think he promised he would stay close until you did. Daniel stared at the sentence. Slowly, he looked toward the German shepherd. Rex met his gaze calmly. Not proud. Not excited. Just present. As though he had been carrying out the simplest task in the world. Daniel felt tears finally slide down his cheeks. But before he reached the end of the page, his eyes caught one final paragraph. And suddenly his heartbeat quickened again. Because Emily had written that there was something else hidden in the room. Something she wanted him to find only after he finished reading every word. For a long time, Daniel sat motionless on the bedroom floor with the letter resting in his hands. The house was silent except for the occasional whisper of wind outside. Moonlight stretched across the room, illuminating the photographs scattered around him. The words on the page seemed almost impossible to absorb. Emily had known him better than anyone. Somehow she had anticipated the walls he would build around his grief. Somehow she had prepared for this moment long before it arrived. Beside him, Rex shifted slightly and rested his head against Daniel's arm. The gesture was simple, but it pulled Daniel back to the present. He looked down at the final lines of the letter and read them again. There is one more thing hidden in my room. You will know when you find it. Love, Emily. Daniel folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then he slowly stood. The room suddenly felt different. Less like a museum of sorrow. More like a conversation that had been paused and was finally continuing. Rex rose immediately and stretched before looking toward the bed. Daniel noticed the movement. You know where it is, do you? He asked softly. The German shepherd blinked once and turned his attention toward the far side of the room. Daniel followed his gaze. The bedroom looked ordinary. Bookshelves. Desk. Bed. Nightstand. Yet now every object seemed capable of hiding another piece of Emily's voice. He began searching carefully. Drawers. Shelves. Storage bins beneath the window seat. Nothing. Nearly 20 minutes passed. The excitement he had felt began fading into uncertainty. Then Rex stood and walked to the side of the bed. The dog lowered his nose toward the floor and remained there. Daniel frowned. He knelt beside him. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed a corner of fabric protruding from beneath the bed frame. It looked like part of an old storage case. Daniel reached underneath and slowly pulled it free. Dust coated the surface. The rectangular container was made of faded blue canvas with a zipper running around the edges. He recognized it immediately. Emily used to keep art supplies inside. Watercolors. Sketchbooks. Colored pencils. His chest tightened. He carefully unzipped the case. Inside were a few drawing materials exactly where he remembered them. Beneath them rested another envelope. Smaller than the first. On the front, written in familiar handwriting, were 3 simple words. Open last, Dad. Daniel let out a slow breath. Emily had planned this carefully. There was no rush in her instructions. No desperate farewell. Everything felt patient. Deliberate. As though she had trusted time to do part of the work. Beneath the envelope was a folded sheet of paper. Daniel opened it. His eyes widened almost immediately. It was a hand-drawn map of the farmhouse. Emily had sketched different rooms using colored pencils. Tiny notes appeared throughout the drawing. Some were funny observations. Others marked favorite family memories. A star had been drawn over the living room fireplace. Another over the front porch swing. Near the bottom of the page, a sentence was written in large letters. Every happy memory still lives here. Do not forget where to look for them. Daniel stared at the map while emotion swelled inside him. This was not a treasure hunt. It was something much deeper. Emily had left behind a path. A way forward. A way to remember without becoming trapped. Slowly, Daniel looked toward Rex. The German Shepherd remained beside the bed, watching quietly. For the first time, Daniel no longer believed the dog had been guarding a room. Rex had been guarding a promise. And somewhere inside the unopened envelope resting in Daniel's hands, he knew the final piece of that promise was still waiting. The envelope remained unopened on Daniel's lap long after midnight. The bedroom had grown colder, and the silver light beyond the window had shifted across the floorboards. Yet he could not bring himself to break the seal. Something in Emily's handwriting made him hesitate. Open last, Dad. The words carried weight. Not because they were mysterious, but because they felt final. Rex had settled beside the bed, his breathing slow and steady. Every so often, his ears twitched at distant sounds from outside. The familiar presence grounded Daniel. He reached down and rested a hand on the dog's neck. Years ago, during difficult nights after military deployments, Rex had learned how to sit beside fear without trying to chase it away. Tonight was no different. Daniel finally stood and carried the envelope into the kitchen. He placed it on the table and brewed coffee even though dawn was still hours away. The scent filled the quiet farmhouse. Memories followed. Emily sitting on the counter swinging her legs. Emily laughing when Rex stole pieces of toast. Emily drawing pictures while rain tapped against the windows. For months, every memory had felt like a wound. Tonight, for the first time, they felt like company. The envelope waited beside the coffee mug. At last, Daniel opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. No long letter. No complicated instructions. Just one page. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The handwriting was careful and neat. Dad, if you opened this, then Rex kept his promise. That means you kept yours too. You stayed. You made it through another day, and then another. I knew you would want to stop trying sometimes. That is why I asked Rex to help. He is stubborn. Just like you. Daniel smiled despite the tears gathering in his eyes. A small laugh escaped him. He could almost hear her voice. He continued reading. I need you to do one thing for me. Do not turn our home into a place where only sadness lives. Let people laugh here again. Let dogs run through the yard again. Let someone who feels lonely find kindness here. Promise me that this house keeps helping others after I am gone." Daniel stopped. The words blurred. Outside, the first faint hint of dawn touched the horizon. Pale blue light slipped through the kitchen window. He read the final lines. "You always taught me that being brave means showing up when something hurts. So show up, Dad. Keep living. And whenever you miss me, look at Rex. He knows the way home. Love always, Emily." Silence filled the room. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. Daniel lowered the letter and stared out the window as the sky slowly brightened. For nearly a year he had been surviving. Breathing. Existing. Waiting for time to pass. But Emily had not left him instructions for mourning. She had left him instructions for living. Behind him, Rex rose from the floor and walked to the back door. The dog stood there patiently. Waiting. Daniel looked at him. Then he looked at the sunrise spreading gold across the fields. For the first time in 11 months, he understood what Emily had been asking for. Not remembrance. Not grief. Purpose. And somewhere beneath the growing light of morning, a new promise quietly took shape inside his heart. The promise stayed with Daniel through the following days. It lingered in the quiet corners of the farmhouse and followed him across the property as he repaired fences, fed the chickens, and watched the summer wind ripple through the tall grass. For the first time in nearly a year, the house no longer felt frozen in time. Something had shifted. Not all at once. Not enough to erase the ache. But enough to let light enter places that had remained dark for too long. Rex seemed to notice it too. The German shepherd no longer spent his days outside Emily's bedroom door. Instead, he followed Daniel through the house with a calm satisfaction, as though a long assignment had finally been completed. One afternoon, while organizing Emily's belongings, Daniel found himself kneeling beside her bed again. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight coming from the window. The room smelled faintly of old books and lavender. He carefully folded several drawings and placed them inside a storage container. Then something caught his eye. A loose wooden panel beneath the bed frame. Daniel paused. He was certain he had never noticed it before. He reached underneath and pressed against the panel. It shifted slightly. His pulse quickened. Slowly, he lifted it free. Hidden inside was a small metal box no larger than a shoebox. The surface was scratched with age. A faded ribbon was tied around the handle. For a moment, Daniel simply stared. Emily had already led him to letters, maps, and memories. Yet somehow there was still one more secret waiting beneath the place where she had slept. Rex approached quietly and sat beside him. The dog's brown eyes remained fixed on the box. Daniel smiled softly. "You knew about this too, didn't you?" Rex answered only with a slow wag of his tail. Daniel untied the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of folded papers. Hundreds, perhaps. Some were decorated with colorful stickers. Others were written on notebook pages torn from school binders. On top rested a handwritten note. "Dad, these are for people who need them someday." Daniel unfolded the note and continued reading. "Whenever I heard about someone having a bad day, I wrote them a letter. Some are for lonely people. Some are for people who lost someone. Some are for people who think nobody sees them. Maybe one day you can give them away." His throat tightened. Beneath the note sat stacks of carefully organized letters. Each one carried a simple title. For someone who feels invisible. For someone who is scared. For someone missing home. For someone who needs a friend. Daniel picked one up and opened it. The message inside was short. Kind. Gentle. Written in the sincere voice of an 11-year-old girl who believed every person deserved comfort. Tears blurred his vision. Emily had spent her final months creating gifts for strangers she would never meet. Small pieces of hope meant to travel beyond her own life. The farmhouse grew silent around him. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the fields in gold. Daniel looked at the letters filling the box and suddenly understood the final shape of Emily's wish. She had never wanted her memories hidden away. She wanted them moving forward. Reaching people. Helping people. Living beyond the walls of her bedroom. Beside him, Rex rested his head against Daniel's shoulder. And as the warm light settled across the room, Daniel realized that the greatest thing Emily had left behind was not a secret. It was a mission. Summer slowly gave way to autumn. The field surrounding the farmhouse turned shades of amber and gold beneath wide American skies. Mornings arrived wrapped in cool air carrying the scent of earth and fallen leaves. Life did not suddenly become easy. Daniel still missed Emily every day. Some mornings grief greeted him before the sunrise. Some nights her empty chair at the dinner table still felt unbearable. But grief was no longer the only thing living in the house. Little by little, Emily's wish began taking root. Daniel started sharing her letters. At first, only with neighbors facing difficult seasons. Then with families at church. Then with visitors who happened to need exactly the words she had written years before. Again and again, the same thing happened. People cried. Smiled. Held the letters against their hearts. Somehow an 11-year-old girl kept reaching strangers long after she was gone. The farmhouse slowly became what Emily had hoped it would become. A place where kindness could stop and rest for a while. Through it all, Rex remained at Daniel's side. Yet something had changed in him as well. The German shepherd no longer returned to Emily's bedroom. Days would pass without him even glancing toward the hallway. One crisp October afternoon, Daniel noticed it clearly. The bedroom door stood open. Sunlight streamed across the floor. Dust danced through golden beams of light. And for the first time in nearly a year, Rex walked past the room without stopping. Daniel froze. He watched the dog continue toward the front porch and settle comfortably beside the steps. There was no hesitation. No backward glance. Just peace. A strange feeling settled over Daniel's chest. He stepped into the bedroom and looked around. The room no longer felt trapped in sorrow. The bookshelf stood where it always had. The bed remained neatly made. The drawings and photographs still filled the shelves. Yet the weight that had once lived there seemed gone. The room felt warm. Complete. As though a long unfinished conversation had finally reached its final sentence. Daniel stood quietly for several moments. Then he smiled through tears. "You did it," he whispered. Whether he was speaking to Rex or Emily, he could not say. Perhaps both. Outside, the sound of wind moved gently through the trees. Daniel walked onto the porch. Rex lifted his head and leaned against his leg. Together they watched the afternoon sun drift lower across the fields. The same fields Emily had once run through with laughter trailing behind her like music. The same fields where Rex had chased tennis balls and guarded childhood adventures. Nothing about the past had changed. Emily was still gone. The loss remained real. But love had remained too. Love hidden inside letters. Inside memories. Inside a faithful dog who had refused to abandon a promise. Daniel looked toward the horizon where the sky glowed with soft orange light. Then he rested a hand on Rex's head. The old German shepherd closed his eyes for a moment, content beneath the touch. Neither of them needed to guard the bedroom anymore. The secret had been found. The promise had been delivered. And as evening settled over the farmhouse, father and dog sat side by side in the quiet light, carrying the same truth forward. Some souls leave this world far too soon. But the love they plant in others continues growing long after they are gone. And sometimes, the ones entrusted to protect that love walk on four paws.